Hi everyone, how are you today? We are going to be talking about unpopular opinions and the novel Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. And I pulled in a couple other books by Ishiguro to give some context on my opinions on this book. I don't have The Remains of the Day with me, which is his most famous novel perhaps, but I do have An Artist of the Floating World and A Pale View of Hills. I'm not going to get into those books quite yet. I wanted to start with this one, which was a second attempt for me. I tried reading it back in 2012. At the time, I just couldn't get into it. I thought that the beginning was very slow, so after about 4 chapters, I gave it up. And this year, or recently rather, I've come to the feeling that I want to read everything by Ishiguro to be able to give a really good overview of his work for myself, but also just talking about his work in reviews. Because his books have been very hit and miss for me. Loved these 2 books set in Japan. Didn't care for this book. Really enjoyed The Remains of the Day. And did not enjoy The Buried Giant or Nocturnes. And I can't remember if there was one more, but you get the idea. He's kind of a hit and miss author for me. So I'm going to tell you what I liked about this book, what I didn't like about it, and how I review books. So just out of the gate, I was kind of surprised a lot of people really love this book. In general, I've noticed that although most of the people I interact with are like very positive and friendly and open-minded, some people do get really touchy if you say anything negative about books they really love. And I think that's too bad because to me, an opinion is just an opinion and it doesn't really affect whether I like a book or whether, maybe somebody else likes a book that I don't like. So, and I try to be really fair with my reviews. I know I did one on Lincoln in the Bardo that was pretty critical, but I tried to point out what I liked about it too. My personal motto for this channel, for my Instagram, for my blog is to always be as honest as possible. I mean, I'm going to be biased to some extent just for various reasons, circumstantial, environmental, or whatever. I try to be objective, and I'm not going to rate a book highly that I didn't like because that wouldn't be honest. And I think other people are also entitled to hear multiple points of view. So, long story short, didn't like this book, and I'm going to tell you why. So without giving out too much about this, I'll just read the back here. From Booker Prize-winning author Kazuo Ishiguro comes a devastating novel of innocence, knowledge, and loss. As children, Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy were students at Hailsham, an exclusive boarding school secluded in the English countryside. It was a place of mercurial cliques and mysterious rules, and teachers were constantly reminding their charges of how special they were. Now, years later, Kathy is a young woman. Ruth and Tommy have re-entered her life, and for the first time, she's beginning to look back at their shared past and understand just what it is that makes them so special and how that gift will shape the rest of their time together. Okay, for the first part of this review, I won't say anything more about what this book is about, and then near the end, I'm going to go into that territory. I'll give you a heads up, like a spoiler alert, so that you don't have to learn anything else about the book if you don't want to. But going into this book, I knew something of what it was about beyond what the back says. And not like major spoilers, but, more about it. So I was really expecting this book to be more suspenseful, more of a thriller, and it just didn't do that for me. Most of the book is written, all the book is narrated by Kathy, this young woman, and it's written in this style where she remembers something from her childhood, and then it reminds her of something else that happened, and then there was something she didn't understand. and then some more things would happen, and then fast forward a little bit later, and then she'd remember something that happened in the past, and then how that connected with something now. Like, conceptually, that's great, and at first it was fine, but the whole book is kind of written that way, and after a while, it becomes extremely repetitive. The other thing that's repetitive is the character dynamics in this book. So there's Kathy, Ruth, and Tommy, and Kathy and Ruth have this on and off friendship, and then the three of them have this like love triangle that's understated or unstated. And I just felt like the book was very repetitive. And I get that he's trying to show these people growing up and how they're still kind of like they were when they were kids. The thing is, I felt like by the end of the first part, and there's 3 parts to this, I felt as if I had already learned pretty much all there was to learn about the characters, and for that matter, about the story. Now, granted, not everything. Like, there were a few little threads towards the end that were explained as far as the story, but I kept looking for this big reveal, and I don't feel like it ever happened. There is a scene at the end which is supposed to fill that place in the book, but I just didn't feel like there was much explaining needed by the time I got to it. So yeah, I found this book incredibly boring, to be honest, and I don't really blame myself for not finishing it previously. In fact, even towards the last pages of this book, I just was like losing focus and just wanting it to be over. So that was my impression of the book. Other people had better experiences, so I'd say if this concept interests you, give it a try. It just seems like your mileage may vary. I want to talk now about how this compares to his other books that I really love and why I felt this book was weaker. Maybe I'll start with A Pale View of Hills. Now, I believe this was his debut novel, yes, and this came out in like the 80s. I want to say 1982. Yes. And this book is a real work of suspense and horror. And I'll read the back here. Etsuko, a Japanese woman now living alone in England, dwelling on the recent suicide of her eldest daughter, in a story where past and present confuse, in a haunting and sometimes macabre way, she relives scenes of Japan's devastation in the wake of World War II, even as she recounts the weirdnesses and calamities of her own life. I didn't know going into this book it was going to be a ghost story, and that is exactly what it is. So if those aren't your cup of tea, then be warned. I wouldn't usually read ghost stories intentionally, and so when that stuff came up, I was like really freaked out. But I was really struck by how he worked the personal and the historical narratives together in this book. And while the history isn't like in your face, it has this, it kind of looms in the background and you feel it even if it's not happening directly to the characters. So that's very clever historical fiction. And the other thing is the characters in this are very complex. And towards the end, there was a big twist I did not see coming. And, well, I knew there was a twist coming because I'd accidentally read that online, but I didn't know what the twist was, and I was really taken aback. So this is just a very, very cleverly written book and gives you all kinds of feels that I was hoping for from Never Let Me Go, but they just really come to more fruition in A Pale View of Hills. Now, An Artist of the Floating World is a little bit closer in style. This is also set in Japan, and it's about an artist who is looking back over his life. He's an elderly man, and looking at how his actions during World War II played out. Namely, he was a propaganda artist, and what he thought he was doing at the time was a really good thing for the war effort and for his country, etc. But now, in post-war Japan, where, the Allies moved in and, Japan's getting rebuilt in a different paradigm, if you will, he's really questioning what he did during his youth. And so I really enjoyed the moral dilemmas in here. I enjoyed the history. It's also written in a slower pace, but I didn't feel like it was repetitive, and there is a nice frame story here where he's talking about his family and, things happening in their lives. So I felt like this was really compelling in spite of its also slow style. It just kept your interest better and didn't rely on the same kinds of devices over and over again to help you understand this person's point of view. So, and the other thing I would say about Artist is it does have all these different threads, as does this book, but the threads here are more closely woven and yet not super obvious. So in spite of the rambling of this book, I didn't think that he was keeping enough away from the reader. I think too much was revealed very early on. And the frame story in this one was just not as interesting, honestly. I'm going to now get into spoilery territory and talk about the subject matter of this book and the characters. And unfortunately, I don't think I can really talk about one and not the other. So sorry if you have to stop the video. I'm not going to get into any huge spoilers, but I'm going to talk about the themes of this book starting now. This school called Hailsham has a lot of boarding students, and they are basically children that have been raised for their organs. So the idea is that after a certain age, they will be taken away to a hospital and their organs will begin to be harvested over a period of time, and then they'll die eventually. The idea for this book, the overarching idea, is that what if after the World Wars, what if genetic science was what really took off instead of, say, nuclear science or any of these other things that happened. So that's kind of the premise. I think it's a brilliant premise, and I think it's still extremely relevant. I'll get into that a bit later. Unfortunately, and it could be because this novel is narrated from Kathy's point of view, but because we're looking at it from the perspective of these children who have been conditioned to accept all this, there really isn't any pushback. Not even, in Brave New World, you've kind of got the same setup where the characters are just conditioned to the life that they have. But in this book, it's even worse because they don't have any other outsiders coming in. And the other thing is, okay, so I was just talking about the fact that these characters are conditioned to the world that they live in, and there's not really any alternative perspective. They are just okay with it, more or less. I mean, not totally okay with it, but they go along with it. Even Brave New World has a character, John, who protests against the way things are. And of course, 1984, you've got Winston and Julia. But this book just doesn't have that. So the conflict isn't quite as clearly delineated, I guess. Even though we know what the conflict is, it's just the characters, it doesn't add up for them. I wanted to mention that I was also kind of, more than a little bothered that there were no abolitionists in this book. You would think that there'd be at least some group of people interested in putting an end to this atrocity. The two mentions of religious people in this book were very negative. Apparently the church was in on it. Apparently religious people were okay with it or didn't stop it. And I just find that not only unflattering to religious people, but also that it just doesn't seem realistic to me. There's always people that would say that's not right. I just thought that was really strange. Now, the fact that most of the society in this book is okay with what's going on, that didn't surprise me. There was a good quote, and I will give him credit for this. Towards the end, he's talking about, or one of the characters is talking about the fact that there's no going back. Once you have this supply of organs from people, you're asking people to now not expect that when they need one. It's the demand is so great now that they don't want to stop this process. That's actually a really relevant message. If you look into, well, things like meat eating is kind of obvious, but like if you look into the statistics on number of available organs and number of organ donors from certain countries, you'll find that the numbers just don't match up. So I'm not going to get into that in detail. I will link you some resources in the description, but the point is, this is certainly a relevant message that when you say that the ends justify the means and condition society actually to begin to expect this level of availability of certain resources, well then, taking it away is suddenly going to be, there's just going to be a huge backlash against that. So that was kind of alluded to in passing, and again, it would have been nice if that had been more developed, but at least it was there. So that was one of the positives for me. Another sort of on the same topic, or as far as animals and meat, someone mentioned to me that this book might actually be about animal rights and how we treat them, and whether whether a humane life is makes any difference on the bearing of the death of the creature. I have really a lot of thoughts on that also, but I don't really want to get into that in this review. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Some people do read it from that perspective as well. Overall, however, I felt like the themes did not carry this book, and I don't think it's enough to have good themes. I think you need to have good writing as well, and I just didn't find it in this book personally. So now I want to talk about some plot holes and character traits. One of the big questions that comes up is, why didn't these characters just run away? Why did they stay in this bad situation? I think that is a valid question. Some people say, oh, it doesn't really matter. It's not really the point of the book. I think it's a valid question because there was nothing in this book to suggest that these characters stood out in any way from other people. Now, of course, whenever they were grouped together as Hailsham students or donors, obviously, then they stood out. But just walking around the city, it wasn't clear there was anything that made them obviously donors. So another thing that seemed like a plot hole to me was the whole donations process. This book leads you to believe that they were able to give 3 to 4 donations without a big change in their outward appearance, and even possibly being able to live on past that. I find that really unlikely. I don't know. I mean, I'm not a medical expert or even a biology student, but I'm trying to think what internal organs, how could you donate 4 internal organs without it being something that people would see? And even if it wasn't something people could see, how would you be able to survive having donated 4 things? Even 3. I don't know. That was just a thought. I have done some research about organ harvesting, and I know that it's, of course, not just internal organs that get transplanted, also external organs like skin, things like your eyes. So, I don't know. There is a book, by the way, called The Undead by an author named Dick Tracy, and he talks about this process. I don't want to go into that in detail here. I'm just going to throw that out. I'll link to the book in the description and also a documentary that talks about the same thing. And I recommend looking into it because it's not a very well understood topic, and I don't feel like this book completely represents it. Now, towards the end of the book, I'm talking very end, this is alluded to, these donations that happen when you're barely dead. But it's, again, just alluded to. We don't really, surprisingly, Kathy herself never sees anybody that's had something like that. So I was just not really convinced by that. But at least he did allude to it towards the end. and just threw that out there. So characters, just real quick. I felt like the characters were already established pretty well in the first part of the book, and I didn't feel like there was a lot of development towards the end. I mean, Ruth was she was Kathy's rival, but she was just kind of generally annoying from beginning to end. You know, she had her good points, but she was pretty irritating. Kathy just kind of went with things, like she just kind of went with the flow. And Tommy, you know, Tommy's the one that has that rebellious streak, but I don't feel like it was fully explored. Like, it seemed like one minute he had it and then he didn't. I was really surprised that wasn't better developed, maybe giving him maybe an escape attempt or something. You know, these characters seem to have capacity for every other feeling, so the fact that they don't feel rebellious at all is just really odd to me. Sex was also a really big theme in this book between the characters and just as a commentary, I guess. And that also got really repetitive. It didn't seem to add a lot to the book in terms of either romance or like explaining much. Yeah, so I wasn't really liking the characters either. And this is the kind of book that if it was more character driven, like truly character driven, then I think it would have saved it. It just wasn't enough for me. Well, thanks for listening to this super long book review. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I welcome all opinions. And just keep in mind that I'm trying to be honest here and give you guys the information you need to know whether you want to read or try a book. I am definitely looking forward to Ishiguro's new release, Clara and the Sun, and I have pretty high hopes for that. It's also in the realm of science fiction, I think, so it'll be very interesting to compare with, having read this one recently. So thanks for watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. It was a place of mercurial It was a place of mercurial cliques and mysterious rules. Okay. It was a place It was a place of mercurial cliques and mysterious rules.